we're going to move on here now to Lindsay Smith and rest of her team. This is just going to be a conversation with all of us today, basically about kind of what's happening in the whole educational field. And so I'm looking for you guys to sort of give us your vision and kind of what's going on. I want to start first with structure. So the Learning Council is right now. All right, so structure is these models. These are the models that we're looking at, and this is going to be part of our big national survey. The models of schooling right now are a lot of attention nationally because how organized you are. And Lindsay, you and Brian and Jason were sharing how much order you've brought to your environment, as well as Tracy's team yesterday. But it comes down to, how are you still in the traditional whole group grade and structure? Maybe you've altered your schedule, you've embedded a lot of technology. Maybe you're already at that point where you're blended and flipped, Flip means, you have a different structure for the actual lessons. So you're requiring more to be, when you're togetherness, you're doing more hands-on, and then all the asynchronous is sort of in a different time slot. And then there's the competency-based contemporary. Those are mostly small schools. It doesn't really scale because, you have students all at a different point in every single lesson. And then you find that a lot of the private schools. And then online traditional, those schools just took off during the pandemic, and they're doing a ton of, selling to consumers. A lot of them are also attached into traditional public school as the separate rail you can be on if you're that kid who wants to be fully online. And then the consumer model. And then this new thing emerging, hybrid simultaneous traditional, where teachers are teaching to the kids in front of them, as well as the kids on the screen at the same time. And then another brand new thing, the hybrid logistics contemporary model, which is you're not in a classroom all the time. You're in a big house room. But then when you hit certain steps on your asynchronous learning that are classroom oriented, then you get a notification once the cohort is full, and it triggers the classroom moment, but then you're back in the homeroom. So you can either be in the homeroom or you can be somewhere else remote. But once those moments of togetherness are triggered, then the traditional old line way of doing things manifests, but it's completely individually paced. So then the last model is combining big blocks of time that are this new logistics arena with traditional. So those are the 8 models that we're looking at right now as the ones that are covering everything that's happening in the United States. So I want to have you guys speak to sort of where you are now and kind of what you see happening in the future with your model and kind of what you're grappling with in terms of the model. So Tracy, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Leilani. And I would say the challenge is that districts have to be prepared to offer many of these models. They have to be super flexible. Parents want choice. They want personalized learning for their children. And so, we had started working with a blended learning model. We had a consultant. He trained about 60 of our teachers, really intensive training on blended learning, using a lot of the Catlin-Tucker strategies. And they became like a small army of teachers to help the rest of our 700 teachers when we had to make this shift. So I do think that our teachers are familiar with definitely blended learning, flipped traditional, even what we call concurrent model, which you're calling the hybrid simultaneous traditional. Mm-hmm. We are polling our parents right now, and we are seeing a thread that wants to have online learning options for their child K to 12 in the fall. So that means that we have to be prepared for that, to have almost like 2 versions of our program ready to go. And that means hiring new teachers. We can't really do it with our existing staffing. But it's also an opportunity to really personalize instruction, something we've been talking about. Now we're going to have to make it happen.
Yeah, and we are seeing that from the national survey. 20% of students nationally that remained enrolled don't want to physically be on the campus. Very interesting mix. I know it's being editorialized nationally now, which types of parents are in that position. They just aren't comfortable to come back. And then there's also the huge attrition to alternatives. They just left. So you're saying that flexibility is necessary to even try to regain some of that enrollment of people who've opted out because you're not flexible enough. So I totally see where you're coming from. Flexibility is key. All right. So Lindsay and Brian, which one of you guys want to answer that first?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So we are in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. We have about 18,000 students that we talked about, and our central box model has always been very strong, just traditional in the classroom. COVID hit, and we really started looking at our models for obviously we start with distance learning in the beginning, then we moved over this past summer into this school into like a virtual learning model, but we were offering pretty much all the choices. I know Tracy was talking about all the options, and we looked at our institution as elementary and secondary. We really had to go into two different camps at that point and start operationalizing things based off of like what was best for our students and what families were choosing. And what came into play for us was size of our classrooms. Mm-hmm. And our health and safety plan was dictating so much based off of how many kids could actually come into our school buildings. So our elementaries could house we have 50 elementary buildings. So we were able to house many more kids in the traditional model, but we were offering at that point traditional. You could be hybrid as an elementary student where you were coming in Monday, Tuesday, everyone was home Wednesday, we're coming Thursday, Friday. And then our elementary families also had a full virtual option. We've since narrowed that down into being either you're 100% online or you're 100% in school for elementary. And our secondary level had a similar, but they could be online or hybrid was the only options we could offer because we could not actually do a 5-day model in our secondary schools. So that really put a burden on and a stressor on our teachers because at the secondary level, we couldn't guarantee that they weren't going to have that simultaneous hybrid model. So all of our secondary teachers had cameras in their classrooms and they were streaming, to kids in school and kids at home. So we've again recently just switched to either all in 5 days or you're all at home 5 days, but our teachers at secondary are still, cameras on for kids at home and they're teaching to two groups of students. But just today we had a conversation that's been happening for several months on what are our options, for next year and what are we going to put out there to our community. And our biggest goal is really removing that responsibility of teaching simultaneously. We really want to provide, if you're going to teach.
Yeah, that's the toughest thing.
Yeah, just teach to online. So that's where we're kind of at, and it's really going to.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, there was a little moments of being delayed. So go ahead.
No, that's just where we're at. We're at this, I think, the same point where everyone's at. Like we know, just for numbers, we know that we have online right now, Leilani, the numbers are interesting for us. 23% of our elementary kids are 100% online. 33% of them chose 100% online in middle, and 39% chose 100% online at high school. So when we look at those numbers planning forward, we know it's going to be less than that for next year, but we know it's not going to be zero. So how do we figure out what percentage of our families still want to be online while also trying to bring back people that fully left to go to charter? That's another factor in this as well for us.
Yeah. So before I go to you, Brian, I just want to ask you, Lindsay, because the considerations for your model have a lot to do with the fact of how you manipulate your own calendars and when you can slot human teaching in, right? And how much of a burden you're putting on them. That's an entirely a logistics conversation. And my perception is logistics are so much harder now that there's not a single thing out there that really allows you the management of logistics at the level of like FedEx getting a package anywhere in the world in 24 hours, right? Like right now you're locked into the old world thinking in your systems of I have a calendar, I have my pacing guides, and then the teachers has a known block and they teach into that block of time. And now we're like all over the place. So the flexibility of how you manage time and spaces is completely off the reservation. It's so far gone, that schools are struggling with. I want to be able to be highly flexible, but I don't see other than like how we'd have to have a giant war room with removable sticky notes all over the place where where we could be like, okay, now you're over there, now you're over there, SWAT team in over here for this. It's like we're in a moment of logistics that are hard. So is that the consideration for why, Lindsay, you guys have some kids that are like, you decided like, no, you have to choose your model. You're either the online kind or you're this kind?
Well, truly, it was really a push from our community. Parents are really showing up to school board meetings. They're really voicing what they want for their child, right? So not only do you have, like, I think we talked about this earlier, like the compound of the needs of the pandemic, but then you have like still a little bit of a trickle down effect. We had a very split political community recently. We have, what's going on in the media, and all of those things I truly do believe are leading to very, I don't want to say demanding of voices, but voices that are very, very strong. And the expectation of, I've never heard this so much in a year, is these are our tax dollars. So many people advocating for how tax dollars are going to be spent. So even with the innovation and the acceptance of so many of these models that we see as educators as potential options, I think very quickly get pushed off because other things are being put onto the table. It's just, it's very interesting, this blend of topics that are coming and falling onto the plate of school leaders right now. Yeah,
and I think it goes way deeper than we've been thinking with. So I want to come back to that thought. So Brian, as an analyst, I'm sure that you're having to grapple with a lot with the structural issues. It's not just about the bits and pieces of tech and which teacher's using what and all that other stuff. It's really about how all of it comes together. And now it's not just about how it comes together so that over there in the classroom, the teacher's getting it right. It's about getting it right all the way down to the personalized level, which to the outside world, as you know, as an analyst, means just for me as a not that's what personalized means. It doesn't mean same whole group pace. I'm falling behind as a student. Teacher's going to swoop in and slightly tweak. No. I'm on a different path entirely. So this are the issues with logistics. So what are your thoughts on this whole model structure thing, Brian?
Yeah, so a couple pieces. It's funny that you mentioned that just for me, because even in kind of the early days over the summer, we're starting to talk through these models, and it was a lot of talk of synchronous, and I kind of had to raise the flag a little bit of like, there's going to have to be this sense of flexibility in here, even just as some of our secondary students may have supervisory duties of some of our elementary students with parents that still need to leave the home for work and things. So we, keeping this eye to flexibility and how do we enable our students to be successful. But then it also comes to why that hybrid simultaneous is going to stick around, I think, for a little bit, because at elementary, you can kind of get enough seats in to be able to say, well, this is your online cohort, right? And this is your in-building cohort. But as you get into the different courses offered at secondary, you won't necessarily have enough students taking AP Physics, right, to be able to have that online cohort of, AP Physics course of just online students. So you'll still have that mix, right? So I think it's much more difficult when you look at those course offerings to be able to define any one model, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have this kind of move in and out.
Yeah, and that's the real trick here. Yeah. So coming back to you then Tracy, when I talked about the depth of the conversation, so up here is this model conversation in schools, like how are we going to do this structurally and the magic logistics of it all. But then all the way down at the teaching and learning level is a conversation that is very ripe as well, which is the what resource when, right? And so we just had Rochelle share a lot of all these great tools. But now schools are so concerned about achievement that they want to inspect the actual methodology in detail in terms of auditing the efficacy of the method, not just the resource, but the method of use of the resource in the context of the subject. This is pretty deep. So and scary. So that tells me that the fear factor of loss of students, the fracturing of the model, combined with the lack of achievement, is forcing top management like yourselves to question things at the detail level as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so we are diving into data, and I think it's a good time, it's an exciting time to ask some questions that we think we know the answers to, but maybe we don't. So what is learning, and when does it happen best? And what is the role of the teacher in facilitating learning? To the point of, well, we have to change the public's idea of what teaching and learning is. I totally agree with that. A lot of our parents think that FaceTime that's the best mode of learning. When in fact, we look at metacognition, we look at learning theory, we have so much data on how learning happens, and we don't really use it. Now's the time to marry what we have as far as tools and resources with what we know about learning. And it means giving kids breaks. It means giving teachers some breaks too. It means that independent learning and building executive functioning is a good thing. So it doesn't always have to be lecture based. In fact, the role of a teacher is shifting from being the content expert to being the expert on those students in front of them, and really getting to know how they learn best, and then how they can help them navigate to a more competency-based approach. There is an exciting movement to more competency-based approach to mastery. And I have seen some really cool data analytics programs. One of them is being built into our learning management system. They gave us a sneak peek, and I was super excited that it's going to bring in some artificial intelligence. It's going to look at grades, it's going to look at discussion boards, it's going to look at all the things that students are doing online, and it's going to give a very clear picture to a teacher who might be managing 100 students, maybe 150, but they're going to see a roster of their students with their picture, and then around the picture will be a color code showing that they are, basic, advanced, proficient, that they can see at a glance, where are my students? And it's going to group them based on a lot of, machine learning happening behind the scenes, which is really going to help us move to that competency-based approach that we've been trying to get to mastery. But to your point, when you talked about time, that is kind of the crux of the issue here, because right now time is the constant, learning is the variable, and we need to switch that. We need to make learning the variable or learning the constant based on, these are the things we need to have our students learn, and time is what is adjusted. So some take more time and some take, a little bit less because they just move more quickly through the curriculum. But we have the resources to make this happen, and I would love to, and our data is showing that students can learn just as well online as in hybrid. It really depends on the teacher and the belief, the growth mindset, a lot of different things. But our data is showing that really what has always been kind of the key here is the teacher, but a teacher who knows that their role has changed, that they are really focused on the success of each student in that classroom.
I just love everything you said. We're going to pull a lot of quotes out of that. The time has been the constant, because, I don't know how you've experienced it in life, but I needed more time in math. I needed way less time than other students in all language related activity. I was a super proficient reader early on. But math was something that if I had been given more time, I would have been better at. But I was forced to retain whole group. And that has been my problem with competency-based models, because they're not truly based on pace. There's still an attempt to keep the group together. And that's where it falls apart, right? So I love everything that you said. And I also think that it's not just what is learning, it's also questioning of what is the role of the teacher, because in an age of technology, then that needs to be edifying as much as possible the humanity and less of the other stuff. Because that's what they are. They're humans and they have such enormous qualities to be capitalized on, which I know you know, Tracy. So that's just excellent what you just said. So I'm going to move on, but just want to congratulate you on everything you just said. So Lindsay, same questions over to you, really about, the minutia, getting into the minutia at that level of conversation as well. Like, what is teaching now? What's a teacher now? What is learning now? When you mix all this stuff together, what is a student supposed to be doing? Are they supposed to be sitting on a video all day long, or kind of what? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's funny because I think I go back to so much of I know you probably speak to many people, Leilani, but our conversation we had with you over the summer was so helpful in really thinking about, why are we using technology and how are we using our teachers in this equation, and how can we use the tools that we have to free teachers up to really do the things that they do best, right? Which is working with kids, looking at the feedback or the data and giving feedback. But what we're seeing is we're not there yet because so much had to be created in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
So the role of our teachers now, I think, is not what we want it to be or think it should be. But what it really is right now is, all right, we have our scope and sequence and our standards. Our curriculum supervisors did a nice job of paring that down to the priority standards, which helped to sift out some of that like minutia that you're talking about. And if you're going to do anything, because we have a shortened school day now, we've shortened our time and put more PD time into the week for our teachers to help them. But they're shifting their learning to what really, really needs to happen in this school year to fill in those gaps. But then we're looking at like, how can we create more for teachers on our end as a district, rather than asking them, can you create this for us? Because that's what teachers are doing right now. They are taking analog learning, they're digitizing it on tools that they're just learning for the first time, some of them, in a format that's brand new to everyone, in variety of like, we're being so flexible to a point that it's like so personalized that I say to teachers, yes, I know you I'm going to use Seesaw for an example, love Seesaw, right? It's a wonderful tool. But when I look down at what a teacher is doing in Seesaw, they're creating the lessons, they might be collaborating and pooling it. But if there's 25 first graders in a Seesaw class, that teacher is creating it, pushing it, collecting it, grading it, giving feedback, and there is no grade pass back at all. And I keep saying, like, why does a teacher want to use that when it's not doing anything? It's not taking any work off of their plate. It's actually that 10-minute check-in that I used to do with a clipboard around the room to make sure that kid had that skills, now taking me 30 minutes to do as a first grade teacher. Do you know what I'm saying? And it is a wonderful tool. But then as a district leader, what other option are we giving them? Like, what else are they supposed to do?
Yeah, I call that manual automation, because it like yesterday when I talked about hybrid logistics, the point we're making on the where logistics needs to go is that digital traffic went into the stratosphere as people went digital, and they don't realize it typically at a management level the way you just communicated, because you guys are realizing it. You're like, holy cow, we just quadrupled the workload on teachers and they don't even know it.
And we wonder why they're burned out.
Yeah. All right. So Brian, your comments on the same thing. We were at the top on model. Now we're in the minutia.
Well, I think to build on both what Tracy and Lindsay said, and with teachers not needing to be necessarily the subject experts, they also don't need to be the expert in that tool, right? We shouldn't expect them necessarily to be the expert in a Canvas or a Seesaw, just like anymore. They don't necessarily need to be the expert on long division even, right? We can provide them resources, provide them pieces to automate and take it off their plates. Someone asked me yesterday, what do you see in the next couple years? And I said, I think we're going to see a really big change in the way direct instruction happens, because we don't need to necessarily have this whole group where I, as the teacher, go through 15 minutes of me trying to teach you long division, where I can show you an 8-minute video of somebody who's really, really good at describing long division. And instead I can trade that time to look at assessment data, which again, doesn't have to be something that I manually went through, right? To then be able to pull those groups and help those kids, because my now subject area expertise, much like Tracy said, is now in learning and in my kids.
Yeah.
Right. So we're trading that and really putting the expertise where it needs to be. And I think we'll get there, but it's going to be this mind shift, like people have been saying, about what is the role of the teacher? What are their responsibilities to the people in front of them, and being comfortable with maybe not being the subject expert that we're used to being, or not being the tool expert that we have to be able to answer every question. Like, you don't about Seesaw. Like, you need to know how this piece is going to work, not how all these pieces work.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Yeah. Okay. So now I want to move into another conversation that's really ripe nationally, and that is the question of equity and how we're going to be teaching equity, right? Because I really want the conversation in a lot of districts to be around, are we living in a systematized structural inequity that we've had for the last 200 years? And is the conversation really, should it really be more heavily about structure and the flexibility, like Tracy, you were talking about, that's necessary, and then all the way back down into what you're teaching and how you're teaching it as well. When I think about equity, it's in those two areas, the structure and the personalization. Like, as if you're trying to, as an institution, normalize everything, so everybody's in these buckets, this class, this grade, they're going down the manufacturing line, then you will never get done with the conversation of equity. But if you address structure and you address personalization, you're 90% there. So Tracy, what are your thoughts on that particular conversation around equity for students?
Yeah, equity is huge, right? So how do we make this very abstract concept more concrete and actually make some inroads with equity that are tangible? I think that's a bit of a challenge. I will say in my district, we are growing in diversity, and we feel like that's a strength, but it's also something to be aware of. And the two key things we're focused on are digital equity. And I'm glad to see that one thing from the pandemic is finally an awareness that every student should have a device with internet access. Because of that homework gap, it's real, and it just brought attention to it. So just start there. Let's close that gap. And then the other thing that I think speaks to equity is literacy. And I know that this is also something that a lot of districts are focused on, reading by grade 3. Even with all the technology, our kids will need to know how to read. So if we can get all of our students to read, and we looked at the data, the students who are not reading by grade 3, we track them 9 years later when they got to high school. And we asked the question, how many of those kiddos went on to take AP classes, Project Lead the Way, the more rigorous courses? Normally that would be 15 to 20%. We tracked 3 cohorts of students. And those who were not reading by grade 3, 9 years later, only 1% went on to take more rigorous courses. So then we just shut the door on opportunity, and that's a huge equity issue. But if we can reverse that and focus full throttle on getting them to read, it's a game changer.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Okay, so Lindsay, you next, the dimensions of equity.
Yeah, well, actually, one conversation we had, when we look at equity, I think the first thing, like Tracy mentioned, we realized very quickly, and what I think is an affluent district, the pockets of the pockets that we did not notice before this pandemic, right? Like when you're talking about internet access and the devices, like when we had to send things home and make sure every kid was online, that was number one priority, hands down. It was that and food. We never held farmers markets before for our students, right? Like the food, like if you can't get to school safely, which before was transportation and food, and now it was, you didn't need the transportation, you needed the internet to get there. That was your transport to class. Like that became the priority very quickly along with food. And then once you were able to show up and be nourished, then it was, okay, how do we make sure that they had the resources at home? And that was getting the materials home. It was making sure you had not a learning coach, but if someone's not home with you, how do we check in with you on the back end to make sure you didn't show up for class? Why aren't you there? Like the check-ins became very different, right? Then once we got things up and moving and we're looking forward to next year, this conversation of taking what we're learning from virtual, schedules, if we can create the flexibility that you're talking about, where a high school student might be able to take an asynchronous class, that student might have flexibility in their day to then work, and their family can get more resources coming in the door. That family can also that child can also take that class and add to their schedule, so acceleration is possible when it wasn't possible before. Yeah. That kid that's really still stressing out by coming to school and social emotional wellness is the priority for that family. We don't have to send them to the school down the street that's going to take them in for 3 months, because we now have the ability to make our resources available to all students. So it's like we are seeing equity in a way that we never saw before, and it's making us very, very aware that our traditional schooling was really only working for a certain population of people.
Yeah.
And we have to address that, and we really are working on it. I don't know that we are fully there, but we're fully aware now, which is a neat realization.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you said it that way, because that's what we had heard from Lammersville ISC, which is one of the school districts that is already at that hybrid logistics transition. Like they're even using classrooms differently. They're mostly offices. People are in homerooms, commons areas all the time. They have a lot of working teenagers. The older kids, they were supporting families throughout the pandemic. So this is obviously is a really big deal. Okay, so Brian, over to you, the whole equity dimension.
Yeah, well, I think, part of what you touched on is the system piece of it, right? How it's all set up. And I think there's a piece of it that's even above, school districts when, we start looking at funding formulas and the way that school districts are created, and, those that are funded based on property taxes. I mean, that plays a huge role in the terms of equity, school district to school district.
Yeah.
But I think that aside, when we look at, what I can control kind of within here is I think we just look to be inclusive, be aware of our blind spots, really take a hard look at our curriculums and what we're going through. And I think it's part of the biggest argument of why you still need this human piece where people are together and talking and conversing and being together. And I think that's a really big piece that we need to keep an eye on as we move into these more personalized pieces, but we're not so personalized that now our experience is within ourselves, where it's really that having an understanding of everybody's journey through life that really gets you to appreciate other people's viewpoints and be able to achieve that inclusivity.
Totally agree. And the words that came to mind as you said that was, we're moving into a golden age of the teaching and learning construct where the human intersection is a perfected point. It's intentional socialness. And I've heard that a lot from a lot of districts. It's like the aspect of being social with other kids and with your teacher and all the other stuff that was going on, right, in school was an after effect of being physically together in motion, class to class. Like you bumped into other kids in the hallway at your locker, right? And you had to take gym with them, so you got to know them and their habits. And it was never an intentional thing. So what I'm hearing and seeing now in this movement of models is, hey, maybe we need to have intentional social interaction way more. And Rochelle just talked about that a little bit, like when she started using some tools in the last session, blah, blah, blah happened. And this is SEL and just tips and tricks, right? I would really like to see more of that, right? Like there's an intentionalness of social interaction, because it's the one thing that the fully online schools out and the consumer options that are out there can't take away from the public institutions, right? You have it down cold of having one-to-one human or one-to-many human interaction. It's just recognizing that and using it extremely artfully well and having it done intentionally, right? Okay, so the second Lindsay, which is really Jason, just joined.
Hi.
So, hi, Jason. So why don't we have you weigh in next? Like we were just talking about all the dimensions of equity and the change in models and what's really going on. So why don't you just go off the cuff and comment yourself?
All right, so I just got in changes in educational technology is what you're asking? Or
Yeah. Well, when we talked about models, and I'll go share this screen again, we were talking about, there's many different ways to exist as an institution right now. And, most schools are in this same old traditional manufacturing model. They've always been in, they're tweaking here and there, but they haven't come all the way full circle to just like decimating the model and starting with a new way. So people are adding in all this flexibility, and it has a lot to do with equity. A lot to do with equity. There's dimensions to this, Jason. So your thoughts on that rollover that's happening right now and how that's going to contribute to more equitable systems?
Okay. I think it's happening at an exponential pace right now due to the circumstance of the world that we're in. So I think a lot of school districts close to us, at least, and far, because we talk to lots of people, are allowing things to happen that should have happened a long time ago due to federal funding, as well as school boards being more willing to spend now because of the need. So what's happened, like in our district, is we're now one-to-one K-12. We have a LMS K-12, and we've upgraded our infrastructure in every single building, which we would have eventually got to, but this would have been gotten to with lots of discussions and lots of meetings about the why and trying to convince people. But now people are trying to convince us to move faster. Like we needed this stuff right away, and let's start moving the purchasing as well as the PD. So I think the transformation or the transition, I guess is the term we're using. The transition happened a lot faster, which should help in the fall and the years to come to make the bar a lot higher, as well as the norm a lot different now. That the norm is probably digital equity is the bar. Like you have to all have the tools. Now, how do we start using the tools more effectively will be the brighter conversations, I hope.
I totally agree. Okay, so I want to come back around full circle with each of you, and I want to talk about leadership with your teachers. Because what we're saying, and we've all said this throughout this hour, is that the expectancies are totally different. And the research is showing us 74% of teachers nationwide are burnt out, totally overwhelmed, and they're trying to sort of be what they were in the new conditions. And it's a very big, confused, weird area. My advice has always been, isn't it so exciting that everything's changing? We get to be something new and exciting and different, and it's awesome, blah, 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 and sort of like trying to make people go, I can creatively reinvent myself. I'm in a moment of creative reinvention. This is going to be awesome. It's like going on a weight loss diet or something. So this comes into question is how do you try to lead with that sort of positivity? And what are your comments about all of that? Because it's definitely rough on administrators. They're telling me, I got teachers in my office crying, they're done. It's like they all want to retire and it's horrible. So Tracy, what are your thoughts? What are you and the rest of the administrative team doing?
Yeah, so the key to happy teachers, happy students, that's just the way that it works. So how do you keep your teachers happy, even though like last year this time we went totally online? So then we raised the bar for their teaching. And then in the fall, we raise it again. Okay, now you're going to do hybrid and you're going to do concurrent classroom. And they did it, but there is a limit and they are maxed. So yeah, we are aware of that. A couple things that we have focused on, one we call clearing the brush. What are the little things that we can do to make a teacher's life easier? We are very focused. Most of the people in my department have an educational background, so they get it. Things like single sign-on, things like an airtime unit where you just come in and you just hit a button and your projector goes on, or you can project from anywhere in the classroom. things that will make that teacher's life easier. So we're kind of focused on that. The other piece of it, we've built a wraparound, and I might have mentioned that we have these tech mentors. And so we tapped teachers that were really good with pedagogy and also really good with technology and are well respected by their peers. And we kind of made a second level. We didn't elevate their title, they're teachers, but we gave them a stipend. And now we have 45 of them. And for 45 tech mentors, we pay less than one instructional coach, quite frankly. And it's a very good return on investment. But it's also a wraparound service for them, like their peer right up the hall can help them. That has been a good investment. And then the last thing, and you had mentioned about looking at the calendar, and I love that because even though it's logistics, it's also instruction. And I was listening to Dr. Bedden from Centennial School District, and they're very focused on how can we rethink that calendar to build back instructional time and to build in breaks for teachers. And so right now we have a Wednesday that's e-learning, and we have a slot of time, 2 hours for our teachers for professional development, a lot of things, that's their time. How can we keep that in the fall? I would love to be able to keep that block of time for teachers to work in their PLCs, to dive into professional development as they see fit, to have time to reach out to a student who's struggling, their time, and just some mental health break time too. And to respect that teachers need time as professionals to do their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that comes to mind as you say that is most of the Atlanta districts, they don't have school on Friday. It's all asynchronous learning for the students, and for the teachers, it's on tap a little, but mostly PD or create time. So that's one thought. But yeah, you're totally right. I mean, just think about it this way, Tracy. If they were an ABC, NBC broadcaster, they have a team of 10 people, 15, 20 people behind them, script the whole thing. And then they're walk on, and then they do their thing. And, and that's literally their whole day, like maybe 2 hours of work. And we expect teachers to be on how long? All day with all the planning alone. This is a tough job. So I'm really glad that you guys are thinking about that. Okay, so I'm going to start now with Jason and then Brian, Lindsay. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Jason, what are your comments about the same topic? You're on mute.
The 72%, I was saying, I never heard that. That was a national number that you had.
74%. That was a January survey. 74%. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So we haven't really had a lot of teachers leave, but we definitely had a lot of teachers be upset and stressed and not motivated. It's interesting. We've hired a lot of extra teachers to compensate for virtual learning. So a lot of these teachers are maybe 21, 22 years old, and they're highly motivated because it's their first job. So I don't think they know any other world. So there's two perspectives. Like if you're in a first job and this is all you know, I'm wondering how that's going to translate to when it goes back to normal, because their normal is right now. They were hired in a pandemic, and they're going to learn the hard way of how to work in a very hard job. So next year might seem really easy for that group. Some teachers that have been teaching for, let's say, 25 plus years, that this is new for them, might be stressed as well. But I've been finding most of the stressors and the teachers I talk to aren't necessarily work-based stresses. Their spouse might have lost their job. They might have a child who's struggling with school. They might not be able to exercise as much because their gym is closed, or they might not be able to go to happy hour at a bar with their friends that they used to do once a month to relieve stress. So it's not necessarily from the job per se that I've been finding. And a lot of people have actually told me they found relief coming to work when we opened up the buildings again, because it was the only thing that was normal again in their life. So wow. I talk to a lot of people in our district. Like I've been in our district for this is my 26th year, and I feel like I know pretty much everyone, and I talk to lots of people. So there are people that are like mad at central office or whatever for making us do things, but I find most of the time when I talk to people one-on-one, it's not the work that stresses them out. It's once they go home, they have to learn how to virtual work with their child or anything else that is not the norm for them. So I guess I didn't really answer your question. I was just giving you a different perspective, but
Yeah, it's good. It's
yeah,
good.
for teachers that are stressed, I mean, I agree with Tracy. Like there's everything she said, I agree with. I just wanted to add that the other piece to look at that what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So Brian, your thoughts, same area.
Well, I think, and Lindsay's experienced this too, but I think in the past we had the same kind of what you tried, like, no, we can do this. Like, come on, guys. And we discovered really quick that coming in with that was a surefire way to just get someone more mad at you. They kind of almost needed the difficulty recognized, you know, that yes, this is a different environment and it can be a difficult environment. You know, that was, I remember clearly Lindsay and I remember talking about this with Lindsay and kind of having this, like, I think we're making people more upset. So kind of switching that tactic a bit. And I think, you know, something that we did similar to Tracy again is try to clear that brush. And that's part of why our interoperability plan was so important, to make things as simple as possible. And then I know when I talked to folks, it was giving them that permission for things to not go 100% the way that they would want it to go. You know, we have really great teachers and they want things to go from A to B to C in perfect fashion. But giving them that freedom that A to B might take you a 2-minute longer transition than it used to, and that's fine. And really trying to equate what's happening on the screen with things that they did in the classroom, I felt like made them feel a little bit better, as they were expecting those digital transitions to happen again right away, from doing direct instruction to work to small group. And kind of, I remember being in a building and talking to a group of teachers and saying, you know, you'll have those transition times as like, well, we're going to move to the carpet and read, and that time to move back. And that's your time where you're going from watch this PowerPoint to now come back to where we're going to talk, and trying to put it in terms that cognitively makes sense to the way that they used to do it, and just giving them the freedom that it can take longer, I think alleviated some of that stress. And, you know, that nobody's looking for perfection, right? Nobody's in wanting to make sure that every, you know, I is dotted and T is crossed in the world that we're living. I feel like went a long way with those folks.
Yeah. Super smart. And I like the fact that you're advocating, like, don't run around being a cheerleader all day, because people will bash you. Totally get that. I come from a cheerleader background, so that I would have been like beat up by the end of the day. Okay. So Lindsay, final words.
So we call it toxic positivity here. So like, we are saying that like positivity is great, but if it's toxic, like there's toxic, like the polar toxic scale, right? So we just try to go in there with that understanding that not just even the simple way of walking into a classroom anymore, how are you doing? That's not the question that you lead with any longer. You're very thoughtful in how you enter a classroom. It's more like, is there anything I can do to make your day easier today? Or is there anything that I can help you with? Like, when you can take something off someone's plate and they recognize that it's coming from this place of sincerity, that goes a long way with, you know, the conversation. But the other thing I think we're giving teachers is permission to let go of some of those things. I think as administrators, we tried to get people to let go of before, but as teachers, we're naturally type A, and this is how I do it. This is how I want it to be. Like, I think people in our world are seeing what's important. That decorated bulletin board that used to be like what you spent hours on before may not be, you know, you're starting to see what's important in this world, and we have to hone in on that. And we're also doing a lot with just time is money in a world of a teacher, right? Like we want to reimburse them for certain things, but even more so, I think our teachers are looking for time more than they are anything else. Time to collaborate, time to grade, time to plan. But it's also, I don't know how everyone else's districts are perceiving teachers, but I do think that teachers are under fire right now in how the public perceives their role, especially in a virtual world, because it doesn't look the same way maybe when you and I went to school. So someone, well, they must not be doing their job. So as a district, we need to really celebrate and make sure that we're making that narrative. We're celebrating. Look at what these teachers are doing. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not measured based off of what you're sending home to hang on the fridge anymore, right? Like we have to figure out how do we celebrate what teachers are doing, and it's not always product based any longer, which is what feels different for families, right? Like this is what it used to be a teacher. So I knew my teacher was working hard because my kid was getting a grade and they were bringing this home. But how do you measure that when you're not used to seeing it that way? A teacher's work is very different. So just finding ways to celebrate teachers and not have it be falling all on them. Like, what can we take off of their plate? Let's celebrate them, give them permission to change, make things just easier. And I think that's what we're trying to do because we recognize how difficult it is.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree with that. I almost want to just volunteer and fly over there and then like just walk into some teacher's, schedule and just go, I'll take over for a day. Go to the spa. Just go. Right? Like that would be super fun.
TV show episode. You could be like the new Ellen of education or something.
Yes, I like swoop in and I'm like, there's one for everyone. Blah blah blah. I'll take you to have a day off. Or here's a coupon for the day I'll take over. Just let me know when. So that would be super fun. So want to thank you guys for everything that you've done. If anyone is on the line right now, you guys have questions, let us know. This broadcast will be going out in a couple weeks once we fully edit. So the whole nation gets to hear from all of you, which is super exciting because we get so many comments back as Learning Counsel. That was awesome, blah, 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 what so-and-so said. So thank you guys very much. Thank you, Jason, Lindsay, Brian. Thank you, Tracy. And Tracy, thank your whole team for me.
Well, thank you.
They were awesome. And that's all we have for you right now. So we're going to release you back to the wild. Go forth, flourish and prosper, do great, lead your schools. And thanks for being with us today. Goodbye.